Myth. We live in an age of freedom unlike any other. Most of us think of ourselves as essentially free, in ways that our ancestors were not. After we in the West broke from the traditional world in the 19th century, we finally had the ability to decide for ourselves how to organize the world. We spent 2 centuries grappling with various competing ideologies: socialism, fascism, communism, and democratic capitalism. And once all but one of those ideas was largely discredited, we finally arrived at the end of history. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, neoliberalism seemed to have won out as the one correct way of organizing the world, the one that best enables humans to flourish and prosper. But what do we make then of the unhappiness, narcissism, and anxiety surging in the developed world? We are told that hard work will lead to success, yet the gap between rich and poor has widened dramatically, and social mobility is on the decline. Our lives are mediated by all kinds of fascinating and impressive devices. We have achieved unprecedented medical advances, yet we face environmental and humanitarian crises on a frightening scale. Several decades later, our great optimism has disappeared. We no longer feel as confident as we did in the way we structured our world. So how much have we figured out? Will historians look back on this area as one of prosperity, equality, freedom, and happiness? Or will they instead define the early 21st century as the age of complacency, as an age of complacency? A time when people were unhappy and unfulfilled, when they witnessed growing crises but failed to respond, feeling there to be no viable alternatives. The Chinese philosophical texts described in this book offer alternatives to this age of complacency, but they are not coherent ideologies that would, for example, replace democracy. Rather, they are counterintuitive notions about the self and its place in the world. And many of them were actually developed in opposition to the idea of living according to any overarching system of thought. From roughly 600 to 200 BC, an explosion of philosophical and religious movements throughout Eurasia gave rise to a wide variety of visions for human flourishing. During this period, which has come to be called the Axial Age, many of the ideas that developed in Greece also emerged in China and vice versa. In fact, in China, as we will see, certain beliefs arose that were very similar to those common in the West today. But in China, such views lost the day, while other ideas emerged in opposition, arguing for a very different path to the good life, to a good life. None of what we are looking at should be considered Chinese views as opposed to Western ones, any more than we are dealing with traditional ideas as opposed to modern ones. None of what we are looking at should be considered Chinese views as opposed to Western ones, any more than we are dealing with traditional ideas as opposed to modern ones. As we explore these concepts, we will see that not only have people been debating how best to organize the world since long before the modern era, but also that there are true alternatives in thinking about how to live well. So this is the first chapter. It's called The Age of Complacency, from a book titled The Path: What Chinese Philosophers Can Teach Us About the Good Life. And it's by Michael Puet and Christine Gross-Law. 2 authors. Interesting. Myth. We know how to determine the direction our lives will take. It's interesting. I like this book. It starts out with it's like, yeah, I like it. It says, to many of us, classical China represents the ultimate traditional society in which people were required to follow rigidly defined social roles in order to live within a stratified, ordered world. Thus, it must be a world that has nothing to teach us. I thought that was funny. He's a good writer. He was a college professor. Yeah, I like this book. It's good. I like it so far. Yeah. And I also watched a movie recently. It was called Lady Bird. It was a good movie. I liked it a lot. So, that's my little reading. All right. Good night.